And so my topic is variations in FIDIC contract, issues and approaches, specifically in Brazil. This is the Brazilian flag. Okay, so let's move on. And Brazil is the largest country in South America. You can see here the other countries are Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, and some others. And although Brazil is bigger than the rest of them, FIDIC is less common in Brazil than in Peru, for example. And but it's starting to gain traction and to become more popular, the FIDIC contracts. And our legal system is civil law. It's not common law. It's civil law. What does it mean? That the written law is the primary source of law and prevails over secondary sources. So first, we need to resort to the civil code, right? Important, civil code. And we have subsidiarily our public procurement law, which we cannot overrule while we are drafting the FIDIC contract. We have to abide by the public procurement law, and we also have our arbitration law. Well, this being said, let's move on to a first conclusion, that FIDIC clauses cannot prevail over these legal elements because there is this hierarchical level. And so our civil law, our civil code is the primary source. Okay. In FIDIC books, variations is clause 13. I'm sure everybody here is acquainted with FIDIC contracts, but we saw a slight, or not so much slight, not so slight, a change from the 1999 version to the 2017 version. And what we saw in terms of changes, in terms of improvements, in terms of adjustment. First, broader variation definitions in the 2017 edition. Second, the simplified valuation method increased emphasis on notification dash documentation and an enhanced value engineering mechanism. Also, a removal or relaxation of the percentage limits allowable for variations. This is important, and as we take a look on that, now we are going to focus on our Brazilian situation that can be common to you in your country, in your business, in your career. Okay? So first, and I want you to pay attention to this. Okay. The procurement law has this number here, but it doesn't matter to you, okay? But this is the law, the national law. And it says, important for the FIDIC practitioner, contractor must accept in the same contract conditions, it means in the same price that was contracted, additions or deletions up to these limits. So our procurement law defines two different limits depending on the situation. The most common one is this one, 25%, right? So the owner and the contractor can make additions or deletions up to 25%. And important, up to 25%, the price has to be maintained. We cannot change unit prices. And there is a second hypothesis, which is conceived by our law, that is a limit of 50% in case this is not a greenfield project. This is not a construction from zero. If it is a renovation, a restoration, a retrofit, then the law allows this variation limit to be raised to 50%. Why is that? Because in a renovation or restoration project, the contractor and the owner are more likely to find surprises, to find unexpected situations. And so it would be rather complicated to keep the limit in 25%. So the law accepts up to 50%. This is clear, it's easily to understand, but when we go to a real project, and I was the engineer in one of these projects, and we had this situation. I want you to think with me. This is a question. What is the limit? Let's think together. What's the limit in case the project's scope is not only construction and not only renovation? For example, an existing airport that needs to be expanded. And so there is an existing portion and a new portion. And so what's the limit? This became a big issue here with the courts and lawyers and engineer, owner, contractor. What? And so a first answer would be the average, 37.5. But some people said, oh, but we have more expansion than restoration. And so we had to do a weighted average to come up with the number. But the best solution is what we came up after we thought a lot and had lots of discussion. We changed the bill of quantity in two. We split the bill of quantities, one for the existing project and another one for the expansion. That was a clever solution, but that had to be implemented during the project, with the project going on. And so this is a lesson learned. If we had thought this at the beginning of the project, it would have been, I would say, easier to manage this, right? And there is something that it's, I don't know if it's right or wrong. In my opinion, sometimes I think it's right, sometimes I think it's wrong. Okay, if I add, this is what the law says here. If I add 10% and I delete 10%, this does not mean a zero variation. It means a 20% of variation. And so this is cumbersome, but this is what the law says. When we open for discussion, for questions and answers, I would like to hear from you what is the rule in your country, in your real situation. So if I had to add excavation and delete, let's say, backfill, then we have to account for both percentages to come up with the final percentage value and compare to either 25 if it's a new project, or 50 if it is a renovation restoration. Let's move on to major issues, okay? You contract manager, you owner, you engineer, you contractor, please pay attention. So let's take the 25% limit, okay? Many owners and contractors see that limit as we call here, a license to kill. What does it mean? That owners and contractors take for granted that they have a margin of 25% to increase, decrease, change scope, add things, change specifications, increase the length of a power line, or increase things in a public school, for example. And so this is dangerous, okay? Why? Because 25% doesn't mean that you have to add 25% to your contract. But most of the owners and contractors think that, oh, my contract is 100, I will end up with a $125 contract. Second issue, variations. The variation limits are used Okay, what's the essence underlying variation? To make owner and contractor to make it possible for owner and contractor to make adjustments, but we cannot make adjustments randomly. And I will give you an example. Some owners here in Brazil acknowledge that the design they have is poor. They have only a preliminary design, but they do the tender stage and they hire the job based on the poor design. And they know it, but they are in a hurry to get the contract awarded and adjudicated because of politics and all this. But they look at the 25% and they say, oh, well, that's okay. We can hire the job, we can do the tender with this poor design because I have 25% to accommodate these adjustments. This is not good practice, okay? The good practice is to have a good design because that will mitigate lots of issues further on. And some warnings. I have two warnings for the FIDIC practitioners. The first one, variations cannot be used to alter the essence of the scope. This was something that I saw here in my city, in the town where I live. The project was to build, among other things, a concrete bridge, okay? A long concrete bridge. But then owner and contractor and the engineer decided to change it to a steel bridge. This is not allowed. Why? Because this distorts the balance during the tender stage, right? Because during the tender stage, we were in a competition to build what? A concrete bridge, not a steel bridge. And so this is a situation very common here in Brazil, but this is not allowed. Also, see how funny things are. The contractor who changed this from concrete to steel, if the tender was to build a steel bridge, that contractor would not be allowed to win because they didn't have because that contractor didn't have a track record of steel bridges. And so this is something that needs to be taken into account. And the second warning, I'm finishing, okay? The second warning is that the engineer should treat a 1% variation with the same degree of attention, of rigor, as a 25% variation. Why am I saying this? Because I sometimes see that when it's a small variation, usually the engineer is not so strict. And when it's a 15, 10% variation, the engineer opens the book, goes to the clauses of determination, reads clause 13, the engineer becomes more technical, but it should be the same thing. And finally, I would like to raise my personal questions regarding value engineering, which is also clause 13, 13.2 subclause in FIDIC, about the sharing of savings, okay? In 1999 edition, we read 50-50. 27, it says it's negotiable, okay? I haven't seen, let me go to the question first. Have you seen shares older than 50-50? That's a question a client asked me here in Brazil. Here in Brazil, I haven't seen, but maybe you know. And what is the big issue here is how to assess the saving, okay? If it's the saving just in the construction phase, that's not so difficult. That's easy because we can make the takeoff and see how many cubic meters of concrete, how many cubic meters of excavation, and so on. But if the gain for the owner is during the operational lifetime of that asset, so it becomes more difficult to assess the share, and how to pay for this share. Okay, so this is my conclusion, that the FCT and FCCM, the contract manager, must be aware of the importance of clarifying the concept and mechanics of variations to owners and contractors, and I would add to the engineers as well.